Let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times so all can build. Let's shine, yeah.
Oh my goodness, here we go. I am so excited. Welcome, everybody. We are back, black here. My name is Dr. Kaia Shivers, and you are tuning into Ark Republic News, where we talk about all things that matter. And we are here with the esteemed, the eloquent, the gracious, the brilliant, the magnificent Dr. Sherice Nelson. Yes, it is so good to see you. It is so good to be back in conversation with you. For those of you who don't know Dr. Sherice Nelson, we started talking about the political landscape during the pandemic at a very necessary time when there were a lot of important elections that had to be had, and just us understanding what that looks like. Dr. Nelson and a lot of folk you see come on here for free. And they dedicate their time, but they see the importance of you, the audience, to be armed with as much information as possible. And so I thank you so much for all of those weeks of us just getting on the horn and chopping it up and talking about it. I'm so glad to see you. You look wonderful, might I add.
Thank you. I feel great. And I feel blessed. And I feel blessed because you and I both have attended HBCUs. And there's one thing that we agree about them, is that there's no place that empowers you like an HBCU, for all of her faults and all of her ways, as I'm learning to say here in the South, the ways. They empower you, and what they remind you at all times is that no matter how many times you fall, you can get up.
Mm-hmm. And being that I'm up north and I still keep it funky from the West through all the bullshit that we've dealt with. It crafts a different type of person. But I always say this, and I say this to my students at the universities, any university that I go to, which predominantly has been PWIs, is the people you meet at HBCUs. There's nothing like it. And so that's something as well. You are a product of it. And so I'm so happy to be in conversation with you continuously, because you keep me sharpened and you keep me informed, right? So that's why I said, let me jump on here. I was trying to take out my braids. Look, all the Black women know I was supposed to be taking out my braids today. But you know what? Dr. Nelson said, look, we got to get on this horn and we need to talk about these recent elections. I said, bam, enough said. Let me just go put something on my face. Let's get it in, okay? I'll be out in these fields with farmers anyway. Look, we good. So what is your sense? What do you make about what happened?
Right.
Okay.
I want to start in there's a lot of false narratives out there around voting, and I really want to help people understand what they're doing when they don't vote. And it's still their choice. But I need to get I don't think that they understand that the discouragement movement is purposeful. And I need them to understand what it does when you don't vote. So first off, I want to dispel this myth about the fact that we need to be looking for an election every 4 years. We need to be looking every year to be participating in an election, whether that be a local election, meaning that it's just an initiative that's at the local level, inside of your ordinance, inside of your city, inside of your county, right? You need to be looking for it. You need to be looking for an election for those reasons. You need to be looking for an election federally every 2 years, because every 2 years, it's a decision about who's going to be your state senator, depending on their rotation. And every time it's going to be a decision about who's in the House. Right? So whoever's in the House of Representatives has to be reelected every 2 years. So we need to stop this misnomer of we are looking for elections every 4 years. We are not. We should be, as a people, looking for an election every year. There is at some point going to be an election on something. So that's the first thing, is that we need to get out of this mindset of election season is only 4 years. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we need to be paying attention to our state legislators. We need to be paying attention to what's happening at the state level. What's happening at the state level is a feeder and a cue of what's then going to happen on the federal. How do we know this? In Alabama, in Florida, in Louisiana, and in Georgia, they're having to create brand new districts in these states because the census of 2020 says y'all got more Black folks. Y'all need to split this up. And Republicans who happen to be white, who don't want to give Black folks any more power, have done everything in their power not to create a district for another district for Black people, and that has trickle down effects on the state. So the second thing is we have to be paying attention to state legislators. We have to be paying attention to what's happening at the state. And the very last thing is this. I've worked on several campaigns. When we make a decision on how to spend money in a campaign, we are looking at a propensity score. A propensity score is how many times you voted in the last normally 4 elections, not 4 presidential elections, the last 4 elections, period. If you do not have a propensity score of 4 or better, we are not spending our first money trying to reach out to you. If I'm a consultant on that campaign and I'm advocating for them to come talk to Black and brown families or Black and brown neighborhoods, the first thing they're going to say to me is, why would we waste our money when they don't even vote? Okay. So what I need you guys to understand is no matter who you vote for, every time you decide that you're not going to vote, you make people like me it becomes very difficult for me to advocate for money to be spent to reach you. So we have to be paying attention to these things because that is how we make a decision about what the next 50 years in our country is going to look like.
All right. So I'm going to push back on that because, you know, I'm the pushbacker of this. I lived in Newark for 12 years.
Of course.
All right. Lived in Newark for 12 years. I currently live in Philadelphia. I've said this on a cast before. Me moving to Philadelphia was partly because of the gentrification in Newark. And I had to move somewhere that was more affordable for me and my family. However, what's going on in Newark is that there's a mass housing crisis that has been going on for many years. It just reached a peak with under the current mayor, who's by the name of Ras Baraka. He is the son of Amiri Baraka, the Black Arts Movement, one of the Black Arts Movement founders. However, what has been seen, and this is theorists have talked about this too, the housing crisis, and this is just not foreign to Newark, but this is going on in cities across the United States, has a direct relation to the decrease of votership. Because if you don't have secure housing, how are you going to vote? So my pushback is that this propensity score that you talk about, if you are working with the Black candidate or a candidate that's trying to reach out to just not Black communities, but Latino communities and poor communities where housing is an issue, how do you factor that in? Or will there be more accountability?
I love that question because that is the exact argument I walk into these as a consultant. Those are the exact arguments I'm walking into. And this gets me into the next thing, Kaia. That's why activists have to be activated and paying attention, because what happens is you're exactly right. We have seen mass displacement, and we're not talking about just displacement from the pandemic. We're talking about mass displacement that resulted in new districts having to be created in the South, because we're seeing a reverse migration from the North, from Black people back to Southern states where it's more affordable to live. So you're exactly right. So in the Northern areas, my argument is that the reason that we need to be reaching out to homeless shelters, we need to be reaching out to community organizations, we need to be reaching out to Jewish synagogues and Muslim and oh gosh,
mosques.
Thank you. We need to be reaching out to Muslim mosques. We need to be reaching out to churches so that then we can find these people in our communities in their natural habitat because they've been displaced. But the only way that we really are able to put pressure to help a mayor, right, fight back against the developers is then having the people strong against what then they want inside of the city. And it's very difficult to do that, as you're saying, if you're worried about where you're going to live. And what I'm saying is that that is a problem that we have to ask our local to fix. And we got to find ways as activists to make this easier for those political consultants or for those people in politics to say, listen, these are where these people are at. This is where they are. Stop looking at this score. That's going to mean that you are only going to get those that are well sewn into the society. That also then means those of us that are well sewn in the society, we have to be even more vigilant about voting and then talking to people who are around us. Hey, we go to grocery stores, we go to inside of our communities. I mean, inside of our communities, there are places that we go that are inside our communities that are not necessarily open spaces where we're not having any conversations. We have to go back to having conversations in our communities and remembering that these are our communities, and a lot of the people that are elected in these spots, we put them there. We put them there whether we voted or not.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, is because I think post 2020 racial awakening, the conversation has been your kinfolk, your skin folk definitely are not your kinfolk. So part of, I think, activating not only activists, but also those to vote or just be politically active in whatever capacity that they can be, is also rewriting how do you make these political people more accountable. Because what I'm seeing as a journalist in me is you have these Black people who have either been in positions of power for a minute or they got into positions of power. There was a push of Black people in positions of power after 2020. But what I've been seeing are there's multiple things, but the two major systems, or what do you call this, phenomena, right, that I'm seeing are, you have people who mean well and want to do more, but don't have the resources or the backing in their respective areas. The Democratic Party is not, backing them. The Independent Party is not strong enough to back them to move an agenda that really is, I don't know if the word, I don't know if I want to use progressive, but that is really, really about people. Or you see people get into office and, they become the establishment, right? For whatever reason, whatever that is. But both, unfortunately, are at the detriment of the average voter or the average Black, brown, poor person living in the US.
Yeah, but this is the thing I want to remind people all the time. And I love to use New Orleans, and there's people that feel differently about this, but there was an area called Congo Square that is in Louis Armstrong Park that African drummers and folks from the diaspora, not just African, but folks from the diaspora and from all across the state of Louisiana were trying to protect as sacred ground. They got it cited as an UNESCO site, right? As a I forget what UNESCO stands for, but it's basically a humanitarian.
It's a heritage
site. But I want to use a proper term. It's the UNESCO site, but it's basically a heritage term. It's a heritage site that's not only designated and recognized by the United States, but recognized by the United Nations. So it's a global recognition of this spot. They use that, those advocates there use that to ensure that a abandoned building that used to be an art studio or an arts complex behind them was not turned into City Hall against a Black female mayor, right?
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's recent.
That just happened a year and a half, 2 years ago, right down here in the state of Louisiana, where I am here in Louisiana. And my argument to a lot of the people, I heard both sides of the argument. I talked to more folks that are inside of the establishment, and quiet as it's kept, the sentiment was, tell the protesters to keep protesting, because if they keep protesting, if they keep making noise, then we'll be able to go back to the people that are pushing us and say, look, the people don't want it. And since the people don't want it, now we're not going to do it. What resulted in that? However people feel about the Black female mayor that's down there, Cantrell, no matter how you feel about it, what happened? The site wasn't used for that. They moved on from the site. After she was reelected, there was no more conversation about putting the site there. She said, the people have given me a mandate. They don't want it there. We're not going to do it. And she only made that announcement once she got reelected and the fight was over. So what I'm saying is to Black people is that if you're upset about what a lot of Black people are doing, what you don't understand is inside of those walls, the quiet as it's kept secret is, they want y'all to keep showing up. They want y'all to keep making noise because it helps their argument that they're making inside. Now, I'm not saying everybody's in there inside making that argument. Let me be very clear. I'm not saying everybody is there, but what I am saying is that you're going to find out who's really there and who's really not if you keep staying down there and applying that pressure. You're never going to know who you're really dealing with until you apply that pressure and see what happens on the other side. Now that that's happened on the other side, it's now created a portal for state legislators here in the state of Louisiana to now go to the mayor directly and say, what do you need from us? Because to make sure that this demonstration don't happen again, what do you need from us? What do you need us to go back down to Baton Rouge? That's an hour and a half away and fight for it, right? It's an entire system. And what I'm saying is that we are abdicating on our side of this, on our side of the responsibility, and then are mad when we don't see the results that we want.
Thank you. Those are really good points. I miss talking to you. So, but let's get it in. Because time is of the essence.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I totally understand. You know what I found out within this last year of just kind of figuring out everything and me being on the ground, but being on the ground in a whole different way, is that, in my opinion, across the board, there has been such a de-evolution and an underdevelopment of the Black political space in all its facets, from elected officials to activists, right? So I'm talking to folk, you know what I mean, on both sides. And because there was a time, whether people want to admit it or not, but there was a time when activists were talking to Black elected officials, right? I mean, because you couldn't have an agenda without the other, right?
Nothing happens until there's a negotiation. And this is where I guess I get the most fired up about this is Obama had a lot of issues and nobody's perfect. Let me stop really real quick. I am tired of Black people expecting whoever's elected to be Jesus Christ, to be Muhammad, to be Buddha, to be whoever you believe. I'm tired of that. They are a person. You have to use your voice to get this person to remember why you put them there, right? Democracy is a contact sport. Now, let me be very clear. I understand that the weight of the world makes it so, especially in Black communities, it is difficult for that to stay at the forefront. But Black intelligentsia, listen up. You got these degrees, not to then go get smart and go talk at some white person's school. Because if you're going to do that to make your daily living, that's fine. But get back to the community and start explaining to them what's really at stake. And that's the other problem. We have separated ourselves so much that there is no social ties anymore. We have segregated ourselves inside of the Black community where I don't want to talk to that person and I don't want to this and I don't want to that. And then we're wondering why there's this ignorant Black political class that don't know anything. It's because we have abdicated in many ways our responsibility. Democracy is a contact sport. If Fannie Lou Hamer, who was poor in Mississippi, could get Black folks who could only read at a 5th and 8th grade level organized in the Mississippi Delta, Black folks of today have no excuse.
So I got to talk about that ignorant Black class, because, I'm in these spaces with the so-called Black intelligentsia folk, and they be ignorant as fuck too. You know what I'm saying? Because their agenda is very narrow and singular, and they don't know the nuances themselves. So to earmark that, so we've been collectively depoliticized. That's that. We have been across the board, we have no claws. We are just like little blunt nubs that come to the table, ask for some, change, and then we go back. So so on both sides, so we have a large voter class that is unaware of the issues. They're unaware of civic engagement. They don't know where to start and they don't know where to begin because, and this is, in my opinion, is very humble. I think we're coming out of like a Black church tradition where we rely on the leader to morally do and ethically do what's right, but not understanding that has not translated in the political space, especially when it comes to money and and power
Well, let me say this.
resources, right? Let me finish. Let me hold on. Let me finish this. Let me finish the thought. But because ultimately, like you said, that there's such a disconnect in the spaces, there is no clear agenda. There's no about where do we go? There's no accountability. So the thing is that I've been looking at a lot of stuff in the 60s and the 70s and everything, even though ideologically, politically, strategically, there were differences. At the very least, people talked, regardless if they had differences, and they came to the table with tensions to thug it, even if it was to thug it out. I've been in spaces, literally in spaces. Me, even as a journalist, there are Black political leaders that will never call me back. There are that don't want me there because I'm fucking up their program. Excuse my language. I'm reporting repeatedly of Black leaders who don't want to engage with the local activists because the optics might look, not well, or they don't like what they're saying or whatever. And we come from a tradition where we were, how do I say it? It got real ugly, but at the end of the day, we could walk out. So I'm giving you the floor. I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
No. So I think I think there's two things that you're saying there, and this is where I want to plug my husband's book, because we talk about this exact thing. Mm-hmm. So the Black, like you said, the Black church is one of the legs that we've always stood on. But the problem is that inside of that Black church, let me say it to you this way. The reason that the Black church in many ways was the conduit wasn't just because of Christ. And although as a Christian, I believe Christ plays a role, the bigger issue was that it established its own political pseudo system. Mm-hmm. And what has happened is that younger generations of Black people are not subscribing to that Black political pseudo system. And so what's happening is we are not learning through experience, if that makes any sense, how to then navigate that same political minefield when it comes to in the secular, or if we're talking about in the federal, local, whatever. This is what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. Inside of Black church, if anybody's inside of Black church, there's all kind of politics. There's politics inside of the church. There's politics depending what region you're in. There's politics about who speaks at what. There's all these politics. However, for a lot of us that are Black church, our non-participation in that from an experience perspective, because of the hurt that was experienced there, we didn't learn how to navigate through. And so now, when it's now, for all intents and size, supersized itself in a political arena, we have no bearings, and we just decide to exit. We decide to not deal with it at all. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you wholeheartedly there, in that there's the mistrust in many ways is bred inside of the communities. The other thing that I think that you're speaking to is leadership. Now, this is the thing that I think that we as Black people need to disavow ourselves of and let ourselves go of, right? Because this is, I think, where the struggle comes, Kaia, where they find a way to make sure that we don't all stay in the tent. So that's, I think, your next point. Your next point is in previous generations, we as Black people found a way to all stay in the tent, right? And I talk about that with my husband all the time. That's what my nonprofit is all about. How do I facilitate conversations between two hostile parties to feel like they can come sit at my round table, talk it out, it stay confidential, we walk out with some talking points that everybody can agree with, so that you can stay inside of the tent. So I agree that that's really the issue today, that wasn't the issue before. But one of the biggest reasons I believe that that's the issue as to why we can't stay in the tent is because I don't believe that everybody who's supposedly in the tent goal is the same.
Very much true. Yeah.
I believe that there was a time where all of our goal was the same. I believe that less and less of us have the same goal. Mm-hmm. And so now it's difficult because you got to pick through who has the same goal as you, right? Mm-hmm. And the people that didn't have the same goal as you, that looked like you, stood out a lot more during that civil rights era, because the laws were so strict. As soon as you saw that person siding with a particular law that was obviously racist, you would know immediately what side they're on. Now, Kaia, we got to sniff them out. We got to set bait for them. We got to figure out who, now it's far more, right? If we think even about the the Black Panther movement and everything else, it's one snitch. It wasn't like a whole bunch of snitches. It was one snitch that they found that then infected other folks, right? It's one. We don't have just one. It's a whole bunch of these folks, and we gotta figure out who's in the tent with us and who's not.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's several things I want to just add and just point out what you said is that I'm glad, first of all, this conversation is talking about the pantheon, or do I want to say it like that, or the pan religious or pan spiritual identities that we have as Black people. We're just not Christian. Excuse me, we're just not Christian, and I'm glad you pointed that out. And you're bringing in, you're bringing in other people in this Black liberation theology that we got away from, right? And how, in terms of how the goals change, right? So I think that's really, really important is that I believe that a lot of people who are using this template, this king template of being a religious leader and as well a civil rights leader or political or somebody attempting to shift the political landscape using that template, I think has been dirtied. It has been it has been muddied, I think, for the lack of a better.
But let me say to you why I think it's
that.
been muddy.
But let me tell you just first of all, there's not going to be another king in X. That was just there were people like that, but the phenomenon is not going to happen again because times change, we change is a different thing. They were just individuals in a very specific, unique, distinctive situation. Even though that there are a lot of people who try to do it, it's not going to happen, right? That's just my assessment of it. But what you were talking about is that how people's goals changed. The more capitalism, in my opinion, encroached in terms of how we defined our destinies collectively, we became individualized. And a lot of that came, in my opinion, when desegregation happens. And there is what I think we need to think of desegregation as a brain drain in the Black community, where a lot of people in the community, the doctors, the lawyers, those who could provide maybe cover or economic resources and a level of cohesion left, and those who remained weren't able to keep it together. And so generations and generations of these vulnerabilities have come to exactly where we are now.
So, but one of the reasons I think that it's become muddy, if that makes any sense, Kaia, is not because overall preachers or teachers or imams or whatever didn't participate in scandal. We're human beings. That's what's going to happen. I don't think that's really the problem.
Right.
To be honest with you, scandals are going to happen. There's going to be bad apples like that. That's the reality of being a human being. And so I don't really think that's the problem. I think the problem is the fact that we live in a space as Black people where we do not segregate spirit from our lives, right? We do not separate church and state, right? We don't live that way, right? But then we judge our leaders that way.
That's a really good point. That's a good point.
And so, and I'm not be very
and some leaders take advantage of that too at the same time, right?
And that's what I'm saying to you is that we have to wholly accept as Black Americans. This is, I think, the biggest struggle and the hardest thing I think for us to do, which is why I think we have this Hotep set of people, right? Mm-hmm. We have to reconcile the idea that we will always be partly American, in that there is always going to be this twinge of individualism that's going to be pulling at us because we are American. That's the reality of who we are. Mm-hmm. However, the way we operate and the way that we feel most harmonious in action is in collectivity. Mm-hmm. And we have to understand that there's a tension between those two things that's never gonna go away, that we are always gonna have people that are gonna be arguing from one side of that point versus the other, more collectivity versus more individuality, that's the tension that exists in being African American. And the faster, in my opinion, that we accept that, then we won't then be taking the Elijah Muhammad and saying, oh, well, is he really a good leader? Because, we heard he smoked this piece of pot, right? And I'm not saying that he did any of those things. I'm just saying that that moral juxtaposition would erode if we would just accept white people separate church and state. We don't. And since we don't, because spiritually we're not set up that way, what rules are we going to set for our leaders that we're going to hold them to? Not rules that white folks have told us we should set to them. What rules are we as a community going to set? And then when they violated those things, how do we deal with them, right? We used to have a council of elders that would help us make those kind of decisions. Like, yeah, you may be mad about this thing that they did. However, if you publicize this, then these are the consequences. And are we willing to deal with that? We have no such thing anymore. And that to me is the problem when we start making decisions about who we gonna out, who we gonna cancel, who we gonna kick out of the tent, who we gonna whatever, is that we don't have this beloved community that King talks about, and the beloved community in the way that Malcolm X talks about. We don't have it anymore.
Ooh, there's a lot to respond there. Where is it that I start? I think for me, I think we over romanticize the church, and it's maybe history, especially me being Black, right? You being Black and knowing those stories in the families of what happens when a pastor or a person, quote unquote, leader of the church abuses their power for economic gain, or, you know, taking advantage of women and men in the church and not being held accountable. And I think one of the critiques, and this is where the quote unquote hoteps come in, that attempted, so this term hoteps to me is a very unfortunate umbrella that has over the years erased and undermined those who were in that aspect of the culture that was attempting to hold religious leaders accountable in a way that their congregants could not or did not, for whatever reason. And as well, explaining that the spiritual expansion of Black people is far beyond what slave masters gave us in terms of what the church meant, even though we know that. So I think for me, in my opinion, the Black church has always had this very complicated dance about what is ours and what is uniquely ours versus what are we trying to purge from the slave master and what the slave master told us. And there have been points, and we both know that the slave master's antics and rationalizations have been used in order to keep a congregation, you know, mollified or not really pushing against or electing the leadership that is needed, right? Hence, that's one of the reasons why the Black church, or there are definitely some denominations that are in a lot of trouble because of the people have left. People don't want to go to church like that, right? So I'm going to finish this, and because this is not a Black church, you know, a Black church thing, but it's very important because religious and spiritual institutions are still very critical in us understanding politically what it is. But I do agree, and I like the point where you say that we have got to figure it out, what we feel are the set of rules, regulations in terms of what our leaders do. But it's not just only in the Black church. It is the community leaders. It's the activists, because what we're seeing in the church, we also see in the activist spaces. How many times have we heard about, you know, sexual abuse, running off with the money, you know, saying one thing but doing something else, right?
But I guess that's my entire point, is that is that when it happens outside of the church, there's a higher threshold. There's always this higher threshold for the church and or religious spaces because of the morality piece that's there. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be there. It should be there, right? There should be there should be a higher ask. There definitely should be, because that's what they represent in our communities. But what I am saying is that higher ask doesn't then mean that that it doesn't mean that you exit permanently and forever, right? Mm-hmm. It means that, okay, maybe that church or maybe that entry point, but go find another mosque, go find another, right? What I'm saying is, don't separate or connect, because what you're doing in the African part of you is separating something that isn't inherently separated. So what I'm saying is that we have to get back to, in many ways, finding out what that means, because I think in my true opinion, I feel like if we get back to that spiritual space and finding our guidance back there, it will then recenter us to then why we're in the tent to begin with. I think that our ability to then walk away from that, because it's been segregated to say that it's separate, and for us it's not separate, it's all connected.
Right.
That we have to figure that out in our own generations. What does that then mean? Okay, it doesn't mean I may join this church or I may join this mosque or that, but then that then means I'm then overly active in this activist group, or I'm overly active in this fraternity, or I'm overly active in this, where I'm then still getting that connection. And what I'm saying is that we have individualized ourselves so much that there is none of that that's happening. All of it is for us as individuals is what's in it for me. And to me, that's the wrong question to even be asking or starting out with.
Which leads to the segue, because that's a very dangerous place we're in right now. I mean, we could be in a very empowering space, and we could also be in a further disempowering space, right? So this is a very complicated, I don't know, juncture, right? And right now, and let me say this, but let me say this though. I'll be the cusser of this conversation. I am so fucking sick. I had to spit on that. Of every time election comes, that people, it's like putting a gun to people's head and say that if you don't vote, oh well, that's your ass. If shit is fucked up, don't talk to me about nothing or anything like that. I'm so over that. I wrote an article back in 2002. It was actually not an article, it was a commentary about Diddy's, it was called Vote or Die, which is to me a very problematic term when you're talking to Black people, and having these, you know, this extreme happens when you don't vote. But that type of energy and that type of message has been reinventing itself with every cycle of definitely major voting, but sometimes mid-year. So I wanted to say that before I say we're at a juncture.
No. And I think
juncture.
No. But I think that the reason that language was used at that juncture is, if we think about the 2000 election, right? It was apt for the understanding of this. It was apt for the how many Black men and women died in Afghanistan and Iraq because of the choice that we made for president, right? And I feel that we're on the brink of that level of decision again, right? Because of the wars that are popping up across the world. So I understand for us as academics how problematic it is, and I agree with you 1000%. It is extremely problematic. However, what I'm learning is there is no nuance. That people have no time for nuance, because they believe that nuance is bullshit. That's how they believe it. Mm-hmm. They believe any level of nuance is bullshit. And so what I think that we have to do to push back those types of slogans is to get very clear about educating them about understanding the overall system, right? And from an offensive and counteroffensive perspective, versus getting them bogged down into the minutia of how the system works. And this is what I mean by that. If we have better overall discussions of, as soon as Black people make any level of progress, there's going to be white backlash. If we would start having conversations more in those terms, and then use the process to then show them what that looks like, we might get some more people committed to advocating and staying engaged. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But we are so busy pressing civic understanding and civic engagement and civic knowledge that we are attacking the very people that we want to participate.
There you go. I have nothing to add on that one. Boom. There it is.
But the reason we're attacking them is because we have so isolated ourselves from them inside of the tent that we are in some ways ashamed that they exist.
Right. And so this is why I have to go back. This is why when we are talking about these folk and everything like that, it can create even more of a, to me, a gap when you be like, y'all ignorant voters. right? I understand what you mean, uninformed, but they're gonna take it some other, that's fighting words. That
No,
to call a Black person ignorant is some fight. You better be ready, but I know you could throw them blows, but you better be ready to put your hair back. You know what I'm saying? But in understanding, I like the point where you said is basically we are making the people who are the most vulnerable, who are the ones who are suffering the most because of this bad legislation, these leaders, these ineffective leaders. We are the language that we're using right now saying that they are the problem, right? But we, at the same time, it was the issue. We've got to get them activated. How do we, Sherice?
My thing is but my thing is we first have to establish, and this is the hard part, Kaia, they are the problem. And we have to acknowledge
well, break that down to me.
We have to acknowledge and accept that they are the problem. Okay, now the question is, why are they the problem? They're the problem because we're the problem, because we've left them, because we've abandoned them, because we've decided that since they don't know, it's not our responsibility to tell them. So my thing is, we have to accept that they're the problem. They are, but why? Because of us. What are we doing? What are we explaining to them? What are we going down and sitting and breaking it down to the level that they understand? I'll give you a perfect example. My father's a mechanic. Okay? When I try to explain to him what's going on in my world, my dad boils it down, and my dad's a Black man, okay? And I won't call him the thing I really want to call him on your show, but let me that's what he is, okay?
That was our 2020 conversations.
Right. That's a grumpy Negro. You hear me? And he old school. And if he got a t-shirt with going to the gym and physical therapy, we like, hey, daddy, could you buy just go to Walmart and just buy a workout shirt. He's like, what's wrong with these t-shirts? Child, okay? I'm trying to get your audience to understand that's the kind of Black man we talking about. That's going to go on rants about Donald Trump. Complete rants about this man, okay? All right. When I go to have conversations with my father about what's going on in my life, what I instantly do is think of a parallel that I know that he's going to understand. How many of us are doing that? How many of us are taking the extra step to say, okay, I understand the census means this. It means this because of this, because of this, because of this, because of this. What does that then mean to their lives? That's the biggest pain point. Right? So the first thing I did during 2020 when I was trying to get Black folks signed up for the census, the first thing I did was, where does your kid go to school? How many kids are in your school, in your child's classroom? If there's more than 30 kids, let me tell you why. It's because you probably didn't fill out the census 10 years ago. And there was no money to put towards your school for the fact that there was more kids that show up. Because every year you lose $2,000 for a kid in school every single time you do not sign up for the census. Do you know how many Black mothers signed up for the census after I said that? Do you know how many Black women was like, girl, this lady say that the reason we can't get no kids and after I got them to sign, the next thing I said is, now, according to this number, I circled back to the community, even during the pandemic. Girl, this is what the numbers say as far as how many kids are here. You go to your school superintendent, and the federal government better be funding y'all for this many kids. And if they not funding y'all from this many kids, go to your school board and say, why you ain't funding us for this many kids? This is the follow-up for what I've asked you to do. Now, of course, there was fall off. Of course, everybody didn't do it. But now I've engaged and educated the community on what signing up for this means and what then the steps are to then ensure that what they did had some results. We're not doing that, Kaia.
Yeah, we're not doing it. I'm not fully convinced though, Sherice. I am not fully convinced of the process. And this is somebody who's been on the ground in so many different ways, grassroots, let's vote, let's do all. I've run the gamut of what it is. And so I am in this point in my life and just trying to, think everything through. is I'm at a point where do we really put our energy? Like, where should we really put our energy in really seeing results that our grandchildren and great grandchildren could actually inherit and know that this comes from the work that we do, right? And this is might be a very selfish moment, but I believe that I represent other people when I talk about this, is because of what you said earlier. Everything it is that we put out, there's always a response to dismantle it, right? And so if we keep going up, going back, going up, going up, going back, whatever that is that, you know, there's a point where we get that there's exhaustion at play. And where I am now is that I don't see where we're going to go with it. Right. I really don't. And this is me just, I know this is a woe is me moment, but I just wanted to, you know, articulate that, because I'm still going to do as much as I can, as best as I can. But there are moments where you just sit down because you're really tired, because it'd be the same thing every time. You know what I mean? Like, you go around a corner, it's like.
But history shows me that I have reason to be optimistic. History shows me that if we look at Black life here in this country from slavery, every historical period has inspiration for why we can move the needle. Mm-hmm. I truly believe that the struggle of back and forth is the human struggle, not a Black struggle. And I think that
correct. 1,000,000%. Yeah.
I think that struggle, our struggle comes in the form of racism, right? But I believe that the human struggle exists in some level of oppression one way or not, because in my belief system as a Christian is that that's the struggle between good and evil, and the inherent struggle between good and evil is going to posture itself different ways for different people depending on their ethnic background and their place in space. And my job is to be committed to the fight of allowing more light to be there than darkness. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what that light to me looks like in tangible ways to me, and we have this conversation and disagree about this back and forth, and have been doing so really since 2020, is I think we as Black people need to be okay with the fact that we get a smaller piece. I'd rather, this is just me, one of the biggest reasons I moved back to the South is I'd rather get the 35% and I'd rather have my 35% and some level of peace than trying to get your 70% and y'all try to kill me over the 70 I'm trying to get. Mm-hmm, and mm-hmm. What I mean by that is the desegregation of Black people wasn't, if you talk to the architects of it from the mind perspective, if you listen to the wife of Ron Walters, who's the brainchild for the Congressional Black Caucus, if you talk to Andrew Young, right? If you talk to, I got the opportunity to interview Abernathy before he passed away. If you talk, C.T. Vivian, I got an opportunity to talk with, right? If you talk with them, if you talk with Bobby Seale, right? Because I'm from Oakland. If you talk to Bobby Seale, who I've had a conversation with, if you talk to all of them, the goal in many ways was to gain in humanitarian, to gain from a humanitarian perspective, was to gain space as a human, not necessarily gain more money, gain more wealth, gain more, right? It was about gaining more access to humanity, and everybody had different ways of doing that. And I think right now the issue is, Kaia, on why there's less hope, is the idea that, number one, we are not committed to the fact that that the progress that we're seeing, that the tree that we're planting, we may never sit underneath the shade of it, and that the shade that we are creating are for our kids and successive generations, the same way that previous generations did that for us. That's number one. Number two, we all got to get committed to actually planting trees all in the same vineyard and all in the same area. We're not committed to that in a way that they were. right? And so that then we get those cross areas of shade. And that really what I mean is we need to return the Black dollar back to the Black community. I feel like we need to turn more insular and try to find solutions within each other versus looking as individuals outward. And I think if we do that, I feel that we'll feel more empowered in this battle against good and evil that's never really going to change.
Right. Well, I'm from the fish fry and two-piece chicken committee, meaning I like talking to the people who, fried the chicken and sold the pound cake and the sweet potato in order to put CT Vivians and the Kings and everybody on that actually fueled the movement. And their sentiments is that they've been left behind. They feel like they've been abandoned. And what we are at now, and I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, because if I didn't have a level of, to keep pushing and moving through, if I didn't still have that, I wouldn't be doing this, right? But these are the folk that we are sitting as a result of generations, one, feeling left behind, two, not getting any of the residuals of what their parents, who were the fish fryers and the two-piece chicken makers, got. And then you have the third generation who just don't care, right? They're 3 generations from what happened during that moment. They don't care and they don't know, right? So I don't know what needs to happen.
I think they don't know, which means that they can't care.
Correct. That's 1,000,000%, right? As the young folks say. So but there's a lot that needs to be happen. For me, I'm at a point in my life where it's not even the point of me seeing the quote unquote fruits of my labor. I think what I hear and what the older folk, what I'm talking to here, they just want to leave off this earth knowing that they're going to be, that they babies are going to be okay. Right. And I'm not saying that they're not going to be okay, but the fight is going to be a lot more funkier than I think that they thought it will be, because we thought we were in a place, and then with the affirmative action gone and all this other stuff gone, it's like, so when I'm going to like these conferences, these policy conferences and whatnot, I'm hearing in the conversations that the downgrade of legislation has probably might have pushed us back 100 years. In terms of us getting back to where we are. But
I guess that's my point, Kaia. So then what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do? What are HBCUs going to do? Are we going to, right? What are Black hospitals going to do? We understand at 42 million, we can't cover us all. However, at 42 million, right? Can we get to 30 million? Okay, if we can't get to 30 million, how do we get to 25? Because I believe in my heart of hearts, we could get to 25 million, right? What are we could get to 25 million. What are we going to do? How are we going to start building infrastructure so that there's a place for them to go? You are right. They have been left behind, but they've been left behind because we forgot that we're building off their back.
Right.
And because we have forgotten that we're building off our back, to me, again, I'm younger, right? So I get to have this more optimistic, more energetic, right? I'm younger, right? And I feel like millennials are the largest generation since baby boomers. We are the largest Black generation since baby boomers. So what are millennials going to do? What are people in my age group are going to do? Are y'all going to keep chasing after an app? Are y'all going to keep chasing after Uber? Or how are you going to use your understanding of automation and innovation to then go back to these farmers and say, okay, what process are you using? How can I help you do this faster? What are we doing as far as on the travel industry stage, saying, how do we then connect to Africa? How do we then affect trade routes so that we can take our farmers that are down in South Georgia, where my husband's family owns 70% of the land, and give them direct access to trade routes and trade agreements, right? What are we going to do, right? What I'm saying is, this is a clarion call to millennials. We are the largest age group. What are we going to do?
Stop shitting on Generation X, first of all.
I'm not
X. No. But no, there is
Generation X.
No, you're not. No, not you. No. This is my collective conversation with millennials.
What I'm saying is, we as millennials are sitting, standing, and complaining. Right. But what are we doing? We are sitting, standing, and complaining, millennials. What are we doing though? What
Uh-oh.
organizations are you getting involved in? What activism are you pushing back on? What board are you sitting on that's speaking? Because if you are in this place of privilege and have in some way some level of secure housing, secure any level of, if you can sit in a house like I'm sitting in with books, then there needs to be something that you are doing, not
Right.
just talking about.
Well, I would say this I would call us the invisible generation, Generation X. I don't know.
We just call y'all the obstinate and the rebellious generation. That's what we just call y'all.
Right. I mean, there wouldn't be a millennial generation without an X generation.
Yeah, and we learned from
you know what I'm saying? But as the generation that is often not in the conversation in terms of like how do we move forward as being the invisible generation, the problem that happens when you don't understand what has happened and why we got here. Because you being a professor, I'm being a professor, we are in the rooms and we hear really great maybe ideas or a desire to wanting to get to a place, but there's such a lack in understanding. We just didn't get here like this. Like, we've had hospitals, we've had whole towns, we've had banks, we had banking infrastructures, we had hair industry on lock, we had the construction industry on lock, we had agriculture on lock. We are here as a result of very intentional dismantling forces, generation after generation after generation. And so I think part of it is that I see a lot of well-meaning folk wanting to do stuff. And when they get out there and they do stuff, they don't understand just how the opposition that they meet, just how stank is going to get. And a lot of people kind of fall back, or they don't have the tools or the knowledge and understanding the industry or what they're up against or what it is that they face. I think
how you're saying is that we need to write a grant, and next summer we need to forget the Democratic Party's convention. We need to have a state of Black convention, right? We find somewhere in the summer to have it, right? And we bring people into the conversation, right? I think that we need to do that, right? The Congressional Black Caucus does one in September. That's great and fine. But my thing is, if we want more succinct demands that then get to them, that we want them to work on, we got to get serious about that. And I feel like if we have one of these, we got to be okay with everybody being in the tent, even folks that we may not necessarily too much agree with, right? Because I don't necessarily agree with Umar Johnson, but he has an audience, right, that we need to be speaking to, right? And so I just feel like you what it sounds like is you signing us up for a summit this summer that we go get $250,000 to do.
Well, this is the other thing, right? And I was on a really great panel about a couple of weeks ago, is that one of the challenges that we have is that we have got to do this and not rely on corporate philanthropic money all the time. I'm not saying not get it or not. So we just have to be prepared, and whatever it is that we do, I don't know what that looks like, because I'm totally open to what that looks like. Whatever it looks like, we have got to be prepared that this will be, even if we got to literally meet in a tent, we got to be okay with that, because we don't know what there's a lot that's going on between then and now. I'm totally open for that, because, and let me say
because
this.
You know why?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because the folks that planned January 6th, or the folks that planned everything over Thanksgiving dinner on a plantation in South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
All it took was a plantation on South Carolina and the right people being around that table for a week to establish teeth into a conspiracy about him losing, that they all knew at some point was false.
Right. And I am so happy to know that you are definitely about doing this. This is not about a Democrat. This is not a partisan thing. You know what I mean?
Not.
Like Malcolm X said, he said, you got to remove religion and politics off the table to really have a true conversation. So I'm glad So we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah,
Now,
and Charles Diggs, and Charles Diggs, the first chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, said, Black people don't have any permanent friends or permanent enemies. Black people have permanent interests. And it is my job to go after Black's permanent interest. And that is exactly why, you know, his career was in shambles once he finished, because that's what he was seriously about. I mean, that's why his career, right? That's why they destroyed his career, because that was what he was really about. And what I'm saying to you is that we have to have a more honest conversation about the fact of that if we're asking these Black people to take these levels of stances, that they also know that they are asking for ruin, and we have to understand that that's what we're asking them for.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have said a lot. You know, I believe in an organic break. We're going to do a part 2. So we are going to close that out. You are listening to Dr. Sherice Nelson, who is the author of, what is the name of your book?
Author of the Congressional Black Caucus, 50 Years of Fighting for Equality.
A super dope international affairs scholar and expert. And so we're going to be talking to her again, but we are going to stop this and thank you all for coming to Arc Republic News.
Let's embark on the Arc Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times, to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times, so all can build. Let's shine, yeah.